Low ball in, Harry Wilson. Yeah! Oh yes! Oh yeah! Across the face of goal, headed in. Yeah! What a wonderful goal from Harry Wilson. It's been coming. Off you go!
After the game, babies are made.
Hello and welcome to That's So Craven, your one-stop shop for all things Fulham. We are back today. We're here to discuss the Arsenal game, a 1-1 draw at Craven Cottage. Terrible weather, but what a great result. Fulham off the back of a pretty interesting run, actually, of what looks like very tough fixtures, and we've managed to coast through them fairly well, let's be perfectly honest. Here to talk it all through, we have Skibby. How are we going, Skibby?
I'm very well. Coast is probably not the word I would use. It was quite stressful. A lot of the time was quite stressful, but no, it was all good. I'm still buzzing off yesterday. I think yesterday was a complete roller coaster. I think it's always that. I think I even said it in the chat. 1-0 half time is probably the worst result or the worst scoreline I could have at that point, because it was just that hope could be dragged down. You don't know where it's going to go, but more likely it's just the disappointment. But no, it was pretty good, and we got a result that actually probably deserved, but also something that we just weren't expecting, I think, before the game. So that's unreal. But before we all crack into it, I will quickly apologise to my mum, because I did realise that on the last podcast I did say get over yourself. I do, sorry. I'm sorry, Mum, and I do love you. And Brighton are okay, they're just not as good as Fulham. But sorry, Mum.
Jeez, do you want to say anything else about your mum on this podcast? Just to we'll just wait. It'll come down the track. I'll wind you up a little bit, and I'm sure you'll slag off your mum once again. And have to apologise on the next podcast.
Maybe Brighton. Brighton. It will be a cool period now until Brighton away, and then I'll have another go at my mum. But there we go. But no, love you, Mum.
You're going to be stuck in a vicious cycle. Yeah, look, maybe Coast was a little too positive over the last couple of fixtures, but really it has been a really good run. Like when we first looked at the fixtures when they were released, this was a tricky period. We know how busy December can be with fixture congestion, and looking at the sides we had to play, knowing, how attacking Spurs can be, how good Brighton always seem to be every season as well. They're up around the European spots, and then coming up against an Arsenal team who will be challenging for the title this year. And then obviously we got Liverpool to come, which we will discuss. But look, Skibby, I guess before we crack into the game, if I'd said to you before the last three games, Spurs, Brighton, Arsenal, would you take 5 points? How quickly would you be biting my hand off?
Very quickly. I would have been in absolute ecstasy if the 3 points from the 5 came from Arsenal, though, because like I've mentioned many a time, is where I live, all my friends, everyone I play football with and things like that, they're all Arsenal fans, so I was messaging them before the game yesterday, probably a bit too arrogant, but hey, I think 5 points from Spurs away, which historically hasn't been a very good place for us. Brighton at home, probably always the given, just because we've been a bit of their bogey team, but they're really on the cusp of that top 4 place at the moment. They are a good team, and from the performances we did see elements where Brighton are really tricky, and then Arsenal were just, we saw how their quality, we know their quality, they're in challenging for the title for a reason. The last couple of seasons they've really been probably one of the best teams loosely in Europe. They've been unbelievable. And there were elements yesterday where we just saw the press, which we'll get into, but to come out of those games where there is undeniable quality just shows how far we've come, and not to mention the fact that we've also had to rotate a little bit as well, just because of, we played, I think it was the Sunday, the Thursday, and then a Sunday, so literally 3 games in a week has been a big ask for the squad. But the fact that we're able to rotate with similar sort of skill levels, and basically we're not making the team any weaker. What I'm trying to say, when Tete comes out, Castagna comes in, Adama's come in for the injured Nelson, who was also tired and couldn't play against Arsenal anyway. But the fact that we've got Muniz and Raul rotating, yeah, fair enough. One of our strikers is outscoring the other quite quite specially, but the work rate that's coming in from the two strikers is second to none. Like Muniz has been outstanding, I thought, in the game that he played against Brighton. So I think I would definitely take 5 points. I think that's probably, I mean, the minimum I would have probably taken from this is probably 3 points, if not two. So 2 or 3 points, I think, is the minimum. Like I was confident that we'd get something from Spurs just because they've been failing. I think Brighton, just given our history, and I pretty much had written off the Arsenal result. I was confident going in because I do think that we can beat anyone at this point. We are challenging, we are taking the game to any team in this league, but I do feel like Arsenal would have been a step too far. So, a draw against Brighton, a draw against Spurs, that probably would have been the minimum that I would have expected realistically. But the fact that we got 5 points from these three games and we're, unbeaten against, Spurs, Brighton, Arsenal is absolute credit to Silva. And, we're coming away from results, the 1-1 against Spurs, we came away kind of disappointed that we didn't win that. And that is all credit to Marco. He's making us believe again. He's taking us to a new level. And it is a project. It is going to take time. But, we're actually now starting to see the rewards of that project. And we're now starting to see that we can break that top 10, if not, that top 7, and start thinking about Europe more realistically. We joke about it. I'm sure everyone's like, we get a result against the top team and we're suddenly like, well, get your passports out. But, it's actually starting to become a bit more real now that, we're halfway through a season and potentially we could start seeing Europe being more and more of an actual realistic possibility.
I think it's absolutely not out of the question. And it sort of stands to reason when I look at this run of fixtures and sort of, Spurs, Brighton, Arsenal, I kind of was half expecting us to get 1 point from those 3 games. And I wouldn't have been overly disappointed in a way if we had only picked up 1 point. Like realistically, Spurs and Arsenal should be beating us every single time. We came up against Spurs at a good time for us personally, with Spurs having a lot of injury troubles. We also came up against the Arsenal team who had a weakened backline as well. So we were potentially a little bit lucky. Brighton, you never know what Brighton you're going to get, and we were fortunate in a way that they just didn't turn up on the day, and we also played very well. So to get 5 points from those runner games, it's very good, because I was genuinely looking at the table, and if you still look at the table now, it doesn't take much for us to drop. If we'd only picked up 1 point, I think we're sitting in like 14th. And admittedly, we're only 10th at the moment, but we're within a point or two of European spots. So look, it's been a good run of results. And before we crack into actually breaking down this Arsenal game, just a reminder, as always, to jump on the Discord. You can find the links in all of our bios on our socials. Really good place to catch a game if you're unable to get there, but also just to stay up to date with all the latest Fulham news. We're very fortunate to have people like Cottage Tactico, Fulham Fan News in the Discord, giving us inside scoops whenever they can. We really appreciate that. So please do jump in, get involved on the Discord. As always, as well, we are new to Blue Sky, so if you're joining up to Blue Sky and moving yourself over from Twitter at the moment, please do check us out at cravenpod.com on Blue Sky. Skibby, before we jump into actually talking about the action in the game, there are quite a number of changes beforehand. We saw Kenny Tete return to the lineup, Adama Traore starting, and Jimenez coming on up front as well. Give us your thoughts on the lineup. Were these the changes you were expecting going into this game?
Yeah. No, I think absolutely. We know that Tete is fantastic in a one-on-one duel, and it made sense for Castagna to sort of take a bit of a run out to give Tete a rest against Brighton. So, when you look at how Arsenal sort of break teams down, they don't really have an out-and-out striker. They've got, Havertz, Odegaard kind of almost like false nine. People are probably going to correct me and go, no, it's not a false nine. This is a Terrequista, and make up some words which I don't know from Football Manager. But anyway, in my eyes, it's a false nine. But basically, we don't have a focal point. All the work comes down the wings, and Saka just being that single point against Robinson was always going to be a key duel. But for me, also Tete being either taking on Martinelli, Trossard, but in this instance was Trossard, just trying to keep him quiet and just being that kind of aggressive defender, which he is, was a very key move by Silva, I think, to give him a bit of a rest. But I think Adama coming in was just the natural for me, because when we're looking to sort of break against an Arsenal team who are very heavy on the press from the front, I mean, his pace would have been key for me to get over the top, get at a weakened defence that you mentioned for Arsenal. So Thomas Partey, the central defensive midfielder, coming in on the wing, I thought, that I was salivating at that. I'm not going to lie. I was thinking that, we're going to try and get the ball to Adama every possibility, look for the overlap from Robinson and really make Partey work, which didn't seem to be the case, but on paper that was what I thought. But Lukic, Berger in the middle was very smart. And I think in these sort of games we think about, or we saw earlier in the season, where we would have Lukic and Berger as a double pivot, but then Smith Rowe would drop out for Pereira because he's got a bit more of a work rate defensively about him. But we did see Smith Rowe get given that opportunity. And personally, I do think that was more of an ask from him to Silva to, he's got something to prove. He wants to let Arsenal fans know that they made a decision to let him go, which was incorrect. So I did think that, he was given that opportunity. And it was quite interesting actually seeing, as he lined up, that, he normally gravitates to the left-hand side to sort of cut in, but we were seeing him a lot more on the right-hand side, which was obviously to sort of combat when we had the ball. We would be in a back four, but when we lost the ball, we would drop into a back five where Tete would go more central. Iwobi was right back, and it's almost like we had he would drop into centre midfield and try and protect that right side. He didn't look comfortable, but hey, that's what we went for, and that's what Marco's asked. It wasn't his fault. I think that was definitely Marco's ask for him, so it was a bit more uncomfortable. But I think it was the 11, I think, at the time that would have been my choice. I think if I would have my full kind of my take on the 11, I think would be that Andreas would have come in instead of Smith Rowe. I just didn't think it was kind of game that Smith Rowe would fit in. But that defence with Kivior, Timber at left back and Partey at right back, kind of ahead of the game, gave me the reminiscence of the old Man United game where I think we won 3-0 or 2-0 when they had Carrick at centre back. They had a real makeshift back four, and you're just thinking, this is an opportunity where we can really get to them. But all credit to Arsenal, their defending from the front was a big ask. But I think it was the right 11, and it was interesting to sort of see the battles on the field as it came to be.
An interesting one that Elton and I were discussing. We watched the game together, and after the game against, after the last game, Silva went out of his way to say that Muniz had sort of seized his opportunity when given the chance coming on, had played really well, and we've seen a lot from Muniz when he comes off the bench, and obviously Jimenez, he did score in the Arsenal game, but do you think Muniz was potentially a bit unlucky in being dropped after what I thought was a very good performance? And also on top of that, I guess were you surprised by that decision? Because I would have thought against what is quite a physical but also a makeshift Arsenal defence, maybe the physicality of Muniz would have worked a little better from the off.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in the last pod. I thought that we knew that Gabriel was struggling for fitness. We knew that Kivior was the centre-back coming in, and I thought that if we were to put a real physical striker on Kivior or even Saliba, I don't think sometimes Saliba doesn't want to be in those sort of positions. It would have really put the cat amongst the pigeons, and I think really, especially with their high press, sometimes we're just going to have to let Leno go long up to the striker. I thought that Muniz would have been the perfect personnel to sort of be that sort of nuisance, just real in your face, elbow swinging type kind of striker. But you know what? Credit to Raul Jimenez. I do think that he actually did the Muniz role quite well, if I'm honest. I did think that he was putting himself about a bit. He was taking the ball down. He was sort of linking up the play. And I mean, even for the goal, which we'll talk about in a bit, but I do think that, he was able to chest the ball down to Iwobi, I believe, or Smith Rowe it was. So he was doing the things that we see Muniz do, but then also adding the goal to the performance. So it's a real conundrum at the moment that you've kind of got one striker who is putting a load of effort in to sort of no real reward, but then you've got a striker who's now starting to be that more physical and play to, not to play to his strengths, but play to the team's strengths and still adding goals to the game. So I think that, unfortunately for Muniz, he did play very well against Brighton, but I do feel that, that Jimenez, by adding goals to the game, but also doing similar actions to how Muniz would sort of take the attack, it's now Raul's to lose, unfortunately, for Muniz. But it was a surprise, and like you say, the comments were really glowing from Marco. But I mean, as the game played out, we saw that it was the right choice, if I'm honest.
Yeah, well, let's go into the goal, and it's interesting because, like I said, right from the start, we were sort of debating quite hotly and almost trying to work out why Muniz had been dropped for Jimenez, because it almost didn't really make sense. And I guess really, in hindsight, it was just pure rotation in a similar way to Castagna coming in for Tete. But for the goal itself, it's down to Jimenez's smarts, I'm going to say, and you get that with your experience, to know that the defender, and I can't remember off the top of my head which Arsenal defender it was.
It was Kivior.
It was Kivior.
The one that he ran off.
He's just completely ball watching there. He sort of checks over his shoulder right at the very start and then completely loses Jimenez, who runs in between the defenders perfectly. It's a great ball from Kenny Tete, who I think that was his fourth Fulham assist in total.
Oh, really?
He's not known for assists, to be fair, Kenny Tete, but it is a perfect ball into his stride. And I actually think the Arsenal defence should do better there. I can't remember again who it was coming across. This is what happens when you watch a game at 11 o'clock at night.
I believe it was Saliba. But
I think it was Saliba. He seems to stand off for a second and maybe expect Jimenez to cut back. And Jimenez takes it quite early, really. I think Saliba was expecting him to take another touch, but Jimenez hits it early. Raya, I think, probably should do better there. It's a good finish. It's not the best finish in the world, and I think a world-class keeper like Arsenal seem to think Raya should be saving that. But look, it's a really good start from Fulham, off to a 1-0. With in a game, I think, and it's something that I mentioned in our chat. We've complained about Fulham not being clinical enough this season, and to see us take our one chance when we get the opportunity, I think that it just filled me with this sort of confidence that we're actually getting better and better week in, week out, and we're learning from our mistakes, if you will, where we've dropped points from not being clinical enough. Now we're getting into those positions, finishing well, and at that point, it was just attempting to hold on, basically. Your thoughts on the goal, Jimenez? It's obviously really well taken and a great ball from Tete.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I didn't even clock at the time that it's only until I saw the Fulham account or the Twitter account today sort of show the video of the 21 passes beforehand. Every single Fulham player touches the ball. And then, the run from Jimenez is probably something you don't get with Muniz, if I'm honest. The intelligence to start running across Kivior and then that real quick trick to sort of checks himself and runs around the back. That was very, very smart. And, that is something that you get with experience. I don't think that's something which it is solely on Jimenez. That's just coming with, a poacher and a striker who is confident and in form, makes that run. But yeah, the ball was even better. Just the fact that, he could take it into his stride. He didn't even have to check himself. I think he took one touch into the box and, like you say, then Saliba's coming across. He thinks he's going to cut. and he just sort of plants it into the bottom corner, and it is a fantastic finish from a player who didn't seem to have his shooting boots on against Spurs, hence why he's probably rested / dropped against Brighton. But for him to take that into his stride, find the bottom corner, and beat David Raya in the manner that he did, just shows, one, that he's a very, very confident striker, but also, two, that he is a very, very good striker. There'd be a lot of strikers in the Premier League who'd be very happy with that finish, to be honest. And it was against the run of play, don't get me wrong. We're not going to sit here and pretend that we were banging on the door for 10 minutes before it finally went in. Arsenal weren't ruthless. They were passing the ball around and pressing us really hard from the front. But at the same time, what Fulham did fantastically, and we talked about this offline, is that passing it around the back that frustrates a lot of people. And I know there's people that are probably listening to this that's probably going to groan and be like, just get it up the field. But when you don't do that and you don't panic, you then bring out the Arsenal players. You had Havertz, Trossard, I think Saka, Odegaard, all pressing us and trying to keep us in our own defensive third. And then all it took was one kind of chip over the top to Jimenez, who found Smith Rowe. And you know what? We're away. We're in behind their entire midfield. And that's how that goal happens. And that is something that isn't an accident. It's planned. It's fantastically executed. It's one of those things where a lot of teams try it. A lot of times it does go wrong. Mistakes are made, and you do pay the price from it. But when it works, oh boy, does it work. And, to go 1-0 up after 11 minutes of constant pressure from an Arsenal team, it pinned them back a little bit. It did peg them back and go, hang on, we're in a game here. And for us to be in a position where we've been defending pretty well, and we have defended pretty well in the last couple of games, to then have a lead to defend against a very, very good side, yes, it ups the ante, but also does play into our strengths a little bit, especially in that kind of counter-attacking football, which we like to play against these sort of bigger and more ball-playing teams that are better than us. It put us in a really good position in that first half, for my opinion, anyway.
And as you say, the recycling of the ball as well, like you said, that 21 passes, which again, it felt like it came out of nowhere, the attack, but actually when you do look back at it, the sort of build-up play and the fact that we, as I said in our sort of chat offline, the ball goes back to Leno twice, potentially 3 times within that 21 passes, and it's just the smarts of knowing we're not going to have a huge amount of possession today. Let's not just lump it forward. And Arsenal were pressing us hard as well. If you watch back, Leno is pressed hard every single time he gets the ball, but we play out calmly. And again, this is a team that's missing Anderson, who would be the person who would play out of defence. It's a team that we've decided to drop Andreas Pereira, who's obviously very good with the ball at his feet, in favour of slightly more defensive players in Lukic and Berger. So we are missing that passing ability, but we did it easily, really. And it's about exploiting and taking that chance in that moment. And Kenny Tete does brilliantly to pick up the Jimenez run. And like I said, it's not something we expect from Kenny Tete. He's not someone who's getting assists. When you look at Robinson, who's already got 4 this season, Kenny maybe gets 1 a season, if that. So for him to chip in an important game against Arsenal and get the assist was great. And look, like you said, it set us up and gave us the opportunity to try and defend a lead for the whole game. And we always knew that was going to be hard against this Arsenal side. But I have to say, they didn't create a huge number of opportunities that I can remember, especially in that first half. There might have been a handful of small half chances, but really Leno wasn't forced into too many saves. Obviously, the thing we do have to talk about is Arsenal set pieces. Skibby, how do you think we actually handled those? Because you wouldn't have seen, but we saw the pre-match coverage, and Arsenal, I think it had been 24 goals from set pieces since the start of last season, with the second best being Man City with 14 goals since last season. Wow. So they're streaks ahead of everyone else in terms of set pieces. Did you think Fulham actually dealt with them pretty well, considering?
I think we did. And you know what? You saw that they clearly been working on it. I think there was 5 players at the back of the box, and then they would do this weird kind of shuffle and then slot in. It was like it was almost robotic at times.
Especially on the free kicks from out wide, you see they all start at the back and then they all go and stand next to a player, which makes no sense really, because why wouldn't you just stand next to him in the first place? But it does work. Whatever they're doing works.
It works. I don't know why, but I mean, first half we had a game plan where we clearly put Adama on Saliba, and basically, what was really funny was, I'm quite a fan of the NFL, so I do understand certain aspects of what Adama was doing. But when you've got a player that big, they don't have to grab or anything. It's all about blocking, and it's all about just leaning into. And Saliba was trying to get around him, and he was just standing there, leaning his shoulder in, just leaning his shoulder. And there was a point where I think his boot caught the AstroTurf and he just slipped off the pitch, and it wasn't a foul because he was standing in a weird position, but he just couldn't get out because of the way that Adama was handling him. But I mean, my dad made a fantastic point, I thought, which was, they all would stand and crowd at the back of the box. So why not just form a line of Fulham players at the back of the box with a wall across the box? And they can't get around you because they'd have to go up towards towards the halfway line to get around to get the ball. And by the time the ball's in, they won't be there. So, that would have been quite a funny way to just completely stop them. Is just all create a line and just link arms and just keep them at the back of the box, and then Leno can just come and claim it. But yeah, I mean, that would have probably been too suicidal, but it would have been very funny if it happened. But you know what? They put the effort in and it works. But I think the first half, I don't think we actually saw a real clear chance from a set piece. I thought that Leno was able to punch it clear. I think Berger, Diop handled it very well. We've got big lads there now who are able to get the ball clear. But, it's clearly a threat, and I do think that we handled it very well in that first half.
Yeah, I think their best opportunity from memory was one that Saka swung in and no one actually got anything on it. It sort of bounced, or did it bounce near the front post? And Leno had to make a sort of punching save from it. But it's interesting because I watched a few little explainers of how Arsenal set pieces actually work, and it's just effectively pure chaos. They overload the 6-yard box and just kind of cross their fingers, but it works because as Jim says on our live stream on YouTube. The reason they score is they've got a lot of 6-foot+ players who are good at heading the ball, and they've got a couple of very good players swinging the ball into the box. When you got Saka and Odegaard putting in corners for you, you're always going to create opportunities. And look, I agree. I think we actually defended them pretty well considering how strong they are from corners. We'll talk about the goal that we did concede though, which was from a corner. We obviously had sort of got used to the fact that they were attacking in the middle of the box and forgot to pick up the man at the back of the box. I think it's Havertz who heads the ball across, and Saliba's there just to stab the ball in. Would you call that a moment of sort of a switch off there from Fulham, or do you think it's just, a good corner routine and good technique?
I'd have to watch it back to call it a good routine. I think for me, they've just kind of looped it to the back stick. Nobody's picked up Havertz, and then Saliba's on his own in the middle.
Four people free at the back post as well. Havertz is just the one who manages to get his head on it.
I guess it's probably because it's probably the rinse and repeat that we were talking about. So they all stood at the back post, and then they would all make a run to the front post to try and get a flick on. So maybe it was just the one time that they didn't run, and we were all expecting them to run to the front post. But I am an absolute hater. It's really come back though. I mean, you might be telling me it's wrong, but zonal marking, I completely hate. Have you noticed that it's now come back into fashion?
Well, I was, like I said, watching this explainer of the Arsenal corner technique, and they were saying the problem is you can't man mark because they put everyone at the back post, and so if you man mark, all they do is they leave everyone at the back post, and they have 2 men sitting on the edge of the box, and they run into an empty box, and you've basically got one-on-ones in an empty box in the middle. So that's where it's quite an effective and interesting sort of technique. And then what happened with the goal we conceded is half of the players run forward, and because you're zonal marking, you're told to basically stand your ground, and so no one's
Yeah.
following anyone into the back post. And that's what Arsenal do quite well, is they basically said if Arsenal can beat the first man, they're always a chance of getting something from here, because they swing it in to the near post and try and get something on it, or they put it to the back post and head the ball across, which is exactly what happened. Havertz gets the ball and Saliba's just waiting there. And look, the offside was fractional. And at first I thought we'd actually got away with one there, but it is Robinson's foot that's just planted, sticking out, and plays Saliba onside. It's slightly disappointing, but at the same time, Arsenal had 6 corners, and that was the only really good chance I think they had from those 6 corners. So can you be overly disappointed?
No. I mean, and going back to the zonal marking thing, I mean, the reason I hate it is because you do look really bloody stupid when it doesn't work. Because I mean, you must have seen the Man United goal against Forest recently.
Harry
where
Maguire at the back
Harry
post.
Maguire's just standing there doing a T-pose, and they've just scored, and you're like, what, mate, you are our biggest defender, our biggest header of the ball, and you're just standing there doing nothing. And I think
he's standing watching
this is
people
why,
run past him, basically.
Yeah, and this is why I hate it. And I think if you look back on corners that we've conceded or set pieces that we've conceded, because we're doing zonal marking, there's always a sort of a mismatch in the matchup. So if you look at some of the goals we've conceded, I remember one being Smith Rowe was out jumped by someone. Like, why is Smith Rowe probably one of our, no offense to him, but he is the weediest and probably not the most aerial threat in our Fulham team, but he's the one who's marking the big man in the box. And I've seen some other ones which just absolutely blow my mind, and I'm just thinking, right, in this case then, if we're going to do zonal marking, fine, but we do need Diop to pick up Saliba, we do need Berger to pick up Havertz. We do need those matchups. And I don't care if it's like, Berger's fantastic at clearing from the front and then you Diop at the back. But, I mean, pick up the threats and then everyone else can do the zonals, right? Just put someone on Saliba and put someone on Havertz who's in that situation. And then that goal doesn't happen, in my opinion. I'm happy to be told otherwise, but this is probably my very old school brain of playing youth football in the sort of late 90s and early 2000s, but it was always the biggest bloke pick up the biggest bloke, right? And just I was a weedy little player when I was playing, and I think I started at like left back or right back, but if I was then told to mark their centre back coming up for a corner or something, I'd be like, are you having a laugh? And I'd only be about 9 years old, and I'm like, this is wrong, this feels wrong. But yet I don't think I would be that wrong. But yeah, I mean, that's the only minor criticism I have. You've got Robinson on Saliba there, and I don't think that's a matchup that you want to have. I mean, I do think that Robinson is quite athletic, but surely you'd have Diop or Berger on him. But that's just my minor criticism. But hey,
no, you're definitely right. I think when you've got players like Diop, who is so good in the air, why is he not picking up the most dangerous aerial threat that Arsenal have? It should be pretty simple like that. And I think you can identify the Arsenal threats in Saliba. Havertz is a good header of the ball. He's tall as well. So you should be having those guys man mark. Maybe Bassi is on him. Instead, he's just not picked up at all because, like you said, we're zonal marking. And it's look, in a way disappointing, but at the same time, I think
inevitable.
Inevitable is the right word for sure. And look, at that point, I think we all would have happily walked away with a draw, shaken hands, and gone, "Yep, finish up there." We I don't want to say fortunate that we didn't concede another one because it's offside, and there's nothing fortunate about offside. It's actually very good defending from Fulham in a way, because I think it's Calvin Bassey steps up at the perfect time and plays Martinelli offside. And I said it actually at the time because when Dad and I were watching together, the ball gets played out to Martinelli and every Fulham player puts their arm up in the air appealing for offside. Dad at the time and me as well both said, that didn't look offside to me. I think it's fine. You look back at it, and he is clearly offside. And I know they're drawing lines at that point, but without drawing the lines, you can see he's offside quite comfortably. And so it's really well done by the Fulham defence. It's the stuff that they'd be working on the training ground all the time. And I'm sure seeing that we managed to pull that off perfectly will definitely give Mark basically a big boost of confidence that the work we're doing on the training ground is working, because we held a very solid line. We played a player offside in a position where he should never be offside. The ball in is good, and it's a good finish as well. But look, in a way, we kind of did get away with one. From there on, I don't think there were a huge amount of very good opportunities. Leno didn't really have to make a huge number of saves. Arsenal may be a little wasteful at times. There was a chance for Havertz where he got into the box and scuffed his shot wide, but really Fulham held tight very well. In terms of players who impressed, I have to say Diop for me Diop is probably man of the match. If not Diop, then Sander Berge, who I thought was excellent, both deserving. Skibby, who's your man of the match for this one? Or rather, give me a handful of players who impressed, because I think it is hard to just pick one person from what was overall very good performances.
I mean, Diop has been fantastic, and I know he makes mistakes, but I do think that he does get scapegoated quite unfairly, I think is the word. It's just, for me, he does. It's just, I think the Dave catchphrase, you should get it printed on a t-shirt, which is whenever Diop makes a mistake, it leads to a goal. But it's just unfortunate, really, that is the case. But on his day, he is a really good defender. Yeah, unfortunately, he's not as good as a ball-playing defender as Anderson, but he was outstanding yesterday. I think he was winning everything. There was a moment where I think Havertz sort of got the ball on the edge of the box and tried to turn in the first half, and Diop just came steaming in, slide tackle, injured him in the process, which is fantastic to see. Not majorly, just a bit of a sore toe. Yeah, just enough to be like, yeah. What was that quote from Harry Potter? It's like Dobby is like to seriously maim, or like, not harm. Only to harm, but not seriously maim, not kill. Basically, that's what we want from Diop, just to sort of let him know you're there early. But for me, he was just everywhere and just winning everything. And he was, what we've seen from him previously is some really poor decisions, I think. Is his passing previously was always quite poor. Like, he'd pass it into Tete when he didn't need it, or when he was marked, or some of those things. But yesterday he was making those decisions where, nothing's on. All right, I'm going to do a little chip up to Jimenez in that area. And I think it actually is a Diop chip to Jimenez, which starts off the goal. It is,
yeah. Jimenez chests it down at that point, I think. But yeah, it does originate from Diop.
And you do see him as a bit of a leader, from what I see, that he is sort of trying to be that guy who controls that back line in a way that I don't think Bassi could. Not to discredit Bassi in any way, but I do see Diop as more of a leader and sort of bit more intelligent, maybe, in sort of controlling that back line. And you know what? It's really unfair, I think, if Anderson is going to be fit, that he walks back into this back line. I think it would be potentially another point where, like Lukic didn't walk straight back in. Maybe it's on the bench for a game or two. I think even talking about upcoming games, which I'm sure we'll touch upon, but I mean, for me, if Bassi's injured or Bassi's suspended, and Anderson is back, I would like to see Anderson come in at left centre back and leave Diop where he is, because I just think he is doing such a good job at the moment, being defence. But Sander Berge, we're talking about, he's just so good on the ball. He's basically a Polina who is strong but can carry the ball. It's going to sound a really controversial comparison, because obviously he is a bit of a battering ram, old Polina. But I mean, if you look at the tactical statistics at the moment, I'm pretty sure he's putting in the same kind of Polina numbers from tackles. But at the same time, there is a lot about him that he is carrying the ball forward. He's drawing the foul. He's playing as that proper sort of centre mid, even like a box to box type. But for me, I think he was probably the man of the match. He probably just edges it, I think. For me, that Sander Berge, I think for 20 million or whatever we paid, he's shown he's actually a bit of a steal. I am a bit surprised though that on sort of the social media you see that, sounded really old there, didn't I? The social media. On social media, you see, Sander Berge people were saying that they were wrong about him. I didn't really see that many unhappy comments when he did sign, but I'm surprised that people are coming forward now, and fair play to you, you're eating your words, but for me, he was the missing piece, and we did say that he wasn't going to be a Polina replacement, but the fact that, him and Sasha Lukic together completes the kind of Polina player and more is something which we did suggest and we saw at the time of his signing. But you know what? I'm actually seeing a player who is a direct replacement for Polina at the moment. It's actually quite interesting that he is stepping up. He is being that absolute tyrant in the tackles like we talked about. But yeah, it's just that moment after we get the ball, it's not looking out wide for Willian or trying to sort of give it to someone a bit more creative that Polina sort of struggled with, but it's him carrying the ball forward and joining the attack, which is quite nice to see. It would be lovely to see him start sort of getting some goals potentially from either the edge of the box or from a corner, but that will come. But for me, I think he would have been the sort of standout. They were the standout too, I think, and Berge edges it, but I think a great defensive performance all round from the entire team, to be honest.
Going back to your Polina comparison there, or I guess talking about the fact that Berge comes in effectively as a replacement for Polina, I actually think we've changed the way we play a little more this season. I think when we had Polina, he was a known battering ram, and you sort of play knowing that he's going to be there doing that, and people have to be around him to support him a little more, which is, I think, why Lukic sort of struggled when playing alongside Polina, because Lukic's strengths aren't sitting and supporting someone who, having to always get the ball and then try and find a better pass because Polina can't do that. It was sort of forced upon him effectively. We've now seen someone like Sander Berge come in who, he's not the battering ram Polina was, because no one is, but he's very good at winning the ball back. And I'll quote Squawker, who put out the stats after the Arsenal game: no player won possession more times, won more duels, or made more tackles than Sander Berge against Arsenal. And one of those tackles, especially that I remember, is when he did get dispossessed by, I think it was Declan Rice, sort of hunted him down. And at that point, you just thought, okay, well, here's an Arsenal goal. They had a decent counter-attack on, where I think they probably had at least one man over. But Berge chases down Odegaard and puts in the perfect tackle, sliding from behind, takes the ball, like you said before, injures Odegaard a little bit as well, which we always love to see. But it's just giving us an option to play in a slightly different way, where Lukic and Berge can do the defensive work, but also both push forward as well. And it just gives us so many options. And I think it's actually going to be a struggle to see either of them shafted from those positions. We had Pereira obviously sitting in the 8 for the majority of the season so far. After his explosive interview, he's obviously lost his position, although we're still towing the party line and saying that it wasn't because of the interview, it was technical reasons, whatever that means. But Pereira now has to fight Smith Rowe for that position, because I can't see him getting in over Lukic or Berge at the moment.
Well, that's an interesting time to talk about it, I suppose.
Yeah, well, Smith Rowe, disappointing, especially against Arsenal. You'd expect him to step up against his old side. Were you expecting more from this game from Smith Rowe?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, just yes. I think, I think I touched upon it earlier on. He had a point to prove. He was at the club. He had to be convinced by Marco Silva to come, because he wanted to stay at Arsenal and play, and he wanted to, kind of go against Odegaard and trying to win that kind of number 10 position. And He's got Trossard, Havertz with him as well, for company. Did I see a number 10 yesterday who would fit in that Arsenal team? No. I mean, yeah, fair enough, given the benefit of the doubt that Arsenal were playing a different way than what we played. We played in a very defensive formation, and you're probably not too used to that, but it's just the work rate. I think that's what I'm missing in the number 10 that we've had historically with Andreas Pereira, is someone who would run their socks off for about 75 minutes, and then, Tom Cairney would come in and sort of see the game out in the last couple of seasons. But I think for me, it's just getting on the ball as much as you can to sort of help us bring the ball forward, but not also bringing the ball forward, but also recycling and looking after the ball. I think that was the key point that we wanted. But then also when Arsenal are attacking, to sort of be in their face, try and win the ball back, and just basically play intelligently and defensively. But I just didn't see that from him. He was just a bit of a passenger at times. There was moments where you thought, if he could get the ball out of his feet and sort of dribble past maybe sort of Declan Rice and that, I mean, it would have been a way for him to sort of improve his sort of overall rating, I suppose, for the game. But it just didn't fall for him. And I will talk about that I mentioned before, which was it wasn't not his natural position, but also his natural role on the pitch, that he was on the right-hand side a bit more. He was sort of trying to block the space for where Iwobi had dropped into the wing, sort of a wing-back position, and trying to sort of pick the ball up there. He normally likes to come off the left, but he was on the right-hand side of the pitch this time. But, I mean, just taking Arsenal into consideration, it's also the last sort of 3 games, I would say, for Smith Rowe, that it's been a bit of a hit and miss time. I mean, he's been fantastic against the Palaces and, the Leicesters. But, if we start to put him in against Arsenal, Man City, he didn't play. I mean, it's when we're playing up against a good opposition, so Brighton and Spurs, he hasn't been fantastic, if I'm honest. I mean, the Spurs game, I'd say he was pretty okay. But again, it was sort of him and Nelson were really up for it playing against Spurs, and managed to sort of show that on the pitch that they were up for it. But I think for me, without being the bias that everyone is going to say that I am, I would like to see Pereira get a bit of a run at number 10, just because when he comes on the pitch, when he came on for Smith Rowe, he does up the work rate. He's running in. He was closing down. I even had people around me saying, like, go on, Andy P, because he was just chasing everything down and just trying to stop the ball coming out from Raya. And you didn't see that really from Smith Rowe. He was just sort of waltzing around a little bit. But I personally would like to see Andreas start in the number 10, just because I like how he's more central. He's much closer to the play with the strikers, and I think it's also been a learning curve for Jimenez and for Muniz that they haven't had a number 10 that close to them. I think when Muniz has been winning all these knockdowns, we're not getting anything from them because, we've got Smith Rowe standing on the left wing with Nelson or Iwobi or someone that just needs to be closer. So I think Andreas Pereira being more central and being closer to the striker will actually help them have better games and score more goals potentially. But yeah, it's been a strange one. And I mean, if you said this season, watching Fulham for the last sort of 15 games, we signed an attacking midfielder for 30 million. He was the most expensive record in Fulham history. Who do you think that was? I don't think he's actually comes into the top 4 of that conversation. If you were an unknown to Fulham and you were watching the games, you'd probably say that, I think Iwobi is probably the one that you paid for 30 million, or maybe even Nelson. But Smith Rowe, for me, hasn't put in the £30 million performances yet. He should be the first name on the team sheet without question for that kind of fee. And the fact that I'm now doubting it doesn't really suggest we're getting our money's worth lately. I'll put it that way.
I think that's fair. And I think, similarly, the point you make, when Pereira came on, he looked... It looked night and day. He was pressing really, really hard and putting in that effort, which is what we needed against Arsenal. And I just didn't see that from Smith Rowe. He also just looked a bit off. There was that ball that got lofted over the top. And, for someone who we paid a lot of money for, you'd expect a very good touch there, taking him towards goal. Instead, it somehow... It wasn't a hard one either. He just seemed to completely lose it. And he lost the ball under his feet a few times. He just looks a little bit off at the moment. And like I said, it almost looks like he's playing with a knock, although I don't think he's got one. I think he just needs to be dropped just for a bit, just to let him sort of gather his thoughts almost and just go, right, you've been dropped, you need to improve, start again. And I'd agree with you. I think Pereira in for the game against Liverpool makes total sense. And I think we could see it because, like you said, Smith Rowe doesn't look great against the bigger sides. He does look very good when we play against the sort of mid-table teams. It makes sense to me that we'd make that change. And I wouldn't be surprised if we also saw Muniz come in for a bit of rotation for that Liverpool game as well. Look, at the end of the day, a really good result against Arsenal, a 1-1 draw. Like we said beforehand, I think we all would have taken that hands down without a shadow of a doubt. So a quick look at the stats. Arsenal, obviously, 66% possession, 587 passes to Fulham's 34% possession, 302 passes. Fulham with just 2 shots on goal, both on target. Arsenal with 12 shots, just the 4 on target for Arsenal. I think we do have to actually look at that and go, we managed to keep Arsenal out for the majority of the game. They had 12 shots on goal. I think in the previous games, they've topped sort of 20 plus shots on goal. And the fact that we kept them away with 6 corners in which you'd expect them to basically get shots on goal in all of those, we did well defensively. And it has to be sort of saluted as a very good defensive performance from Fulham. 10 fouls for Fulham to Arsenal's 9. A lot of talk about Chris Kavanagh online pre and post game. I thought Kavanagh was not terrible. He wasn't great, let's be honest, but I've seen worse referee performances. The yellow card for Jimenez for not going off the other side of the pitch when Martin Odegaard ran off for almost the exact same position and gets nothing, that doesn't make much sense. Didn't make me very happy because Raul Jimenez managed to squeeze into my fantasy team as well, and that was a useless yellow card to pick up. But look, he wasn't terrible. I don't want to see him refereeing Fulham games ever because I just don't think he's a very good ref, but it wasn't a shocking performance from him overall.
Look, I mean, obviously there's history. So let's be honest. there's always going to be an agenda, whether it's real or not, just because tensions are heightened, just because we see his name and he's on the pitch. And I think there's very clear professional fouls from Arsenal that don't get a booking. And then I think Lukic
get bookings, yeah. Lukic's yellow was terrible. That didn't make sense.
Lukic was awful. It was like, it wasn't even it was just a slight trip. And he just branched a yellow card, and then Partey tries to pull, I believe it's like Iwobi's like arms off. Yeah. And he's just like, oh yeah, no, that's fine. But then, yeah, you talked about the sub, so that's fine. But then I think it's also, we're seeing a throw-in that neither of them know what it is. And the default just seemed to be, oh, we'll give it Arsenal then. And like, you can tell me there's not a big team bias, but they are terrified of Arteta. I'm guarantee it, because he's a nasty little what's it, isn't he? He's just so angry all the time. And he's just like, oh, well, Arteta's going to give me it in the neck, so I'll just give it to Arsenal. And I think they should now rebrand Arsenal Invincibles to now just being, well, I mean, Invincibles also fits the unbookables as well. Just they just can't get a booking. I'll be interested to see what their booking stats are for this season. I'll check it afterwards and probably post about it. But it was just unbelievable that anything that Fulham did, yellow card, and he was just an absolute idiot. But like you said, because the tensions are so high anyway, there's going to be an agenda in the back of his mind, because I'm sure if you're singing Cavan as a big C, then he's going to have that in the back of his mind of being like, well, I'm not going to give Fulham anything. But it's just
Yeah.
because there is that here previous between us.
It's sort of a double-edged sword, like you said. Like if he's hearing it from the stands that he's just been given it non-stop, he's not exactly going to start giving us free kicks all game long. So
No.
Look, like I said, he wasn't a great. It wasn't a great refereeing performance, but I've seen far worse. It's just, I think it does just sort of come down to big team bias, and you can say that it's not a thing as much as you want, but it really is. And I think it was proven on the day once again. Fortunately, it didn't cost us too much, because you can see it sometimes. Soft free kicks given, stupid yellow cards, red cards as well in those instances. So we were fortunate to walk away with, not being on the back of a terrible decision or two for the game. Quick look at the table. Fulham sitting in 10th. Like I said, we're only 2 points out of 5th place at the moment. So it's not like 10th place is a bad place to be in at the moment. 2 points clear of Tottenham. 3 points clear of Tottenham, who are in 11th. And a decent gap down to West Ham sitting in 14th. They're on 15 points. We've got 8 points on them at the moment. So there is starting to be a bit of a clear gap between the relegation candidates, if you will, and the mid to upper mid table. So good to see us, like I said, get through this little period. If we hadn't picked up these 5 points and maybe just picked up the one, we'd be on 19 points, let's say, and some still above Man United, but definitely wouldn't be looking quite as pretty at the moment. As it is, we come into a tough game against Liverpool, which we'll preview later in the week, but sort of with a bright horizon on the edge of the horizon, if you will. I think we've put ourselves in a really good position so far this season to kick on. And like you said, I think we really could be challenging for European spots at this rate. And so some good performances after this Liverpool game. We've got a run of fairly winnable games after that. Could see this Fulham team rocket up the league, and it's a hard one to predict this year. The fact that Brentford, who I think have been very poor, are sitting above us at the moment. Bournemouth, up and down. You see how good they can be sometimes, but how poor they are other times as well. Brighton, we saw, obviously a good side, but have the potential to slip up. Forest, I still think, are in a false position up that high at the moment. So, and then you look below us at Spurs, Newcastle, Man United, all probably should be far above us at the moment as well. We're expecting to be far above us. So there's going to be a lot of movement, I think, over the next few weeks. Be interesting to see how it sits at Christmas or in the new year, because I think we'll have a better understanding and the table might have settled a little bit by then. Look, there's still heaps to talk about, it feels like. But before we wrap up, because we will preview Liverpool later in the week, just a shout out for the Fulham women's team who played their FA Cup third round tie on Sunday. A great game against Brentford. Terrible conditions to be playing in. So obviously the wind swirls around Craven Cottage a fair bit, but you can only imagine what it's like when you're playing in some of these smaller grounds where there's no stands to actually, keep some of that wind out at least. Apparently the conditions were absolutely terrible. A 2-1 victory for Fulham. Ellie Olds on the score sheet on the 48th minute, and Maddie Parsonson with the winning goal in the 73rd minute. That puts Fulham into the fourth round of the FA Cup for the first time in almost 20 years. The great thing here as well is that Fulham, fifth tier Fulham women's team, will now be in the draw against women's Super League teams as well. So there's a possibility, a very high possibility, of a Fulham coming up against one of the Premier League sides. And hopefully what would be a very good day out, either home or away. If it's a home game, I really hope Fulham pull out all of the stops to get that game played at Craven Cottage, because it would certainly be a game well worth bringing your family along to. But Skibby, great to see this Fulham team, the only team in Tier 5 still in the FA Cup, to progress to the next round and come up against some really top-class opposition potentially.
Yeah, and I mean, this is similar to sort of the men's game in terms of, you basically just grind out results, looking to eagerly looking to when sort of the Premier League sort of bring in, just so you can sort of start to sort of test yourself and get that day out, like you say. So, I mean, I'm already thinking like, we could potentially go for that Arsenal away or Chelsea and just see how it goes. Even Man United would be nice. I mean, I'm not sure what the girls are thinking, or whether they want to sort of test themselves, or whether they want to go on a bit more of a cup run. I mean, that's your question, is it? But then you've got to start fancying yourself. You got to start thinking that you've got this far. Why not keep going and take some scalps on the way? So, no, big up to the team and big up to the girls. They're doing a fantastic job, and I'm hoping it continues. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the draw. Do we know when the draw is?
Draw takes place at 7 p.m. Today, which is the 9th of December. So
Awesome.
by the time I wake up tomorrow morning, we'll be able to see that. It's actually live on the Women's FA Cup YouTube channel, so you can follow along on the draw there. I'm sure all of the Fulham women's team will be following that draw live as well. Because, well, a question to you: what would you prefer if you were in this situation? Would you prefer to be drawn against? I mean, Fulham are the only Tier 5 side left, but there's not even many Tier 4 teams left in there, really. It's actually all Tier 3, Tier 2 teams left now. Would you want to play the only other team I see, actually, London Bees, who I think were originally affiliated with Barnet FC. They are the lowest ranked team alongside Fulham. They're from the tier above us in Tier 4. So do you want the glamour tie and potentially go and get a game at Old Trafford, for example? Or would you prefer to try and get an easier tie and push further into the competition?
Is this me as a player, or
where's
where's my head in this situation?
Go as
a fan. So as a fan, I always want the biggest tie, don't I? So like I want that sort of day out in the stands of places I wouldn't normally go. But as a player, I would probably fancy a similar level tie personally, because I think you'd want to try and keep the cup run going, just to sort of test yourself, but not make that huge jump. So obviously getting a tier 3, tier 2 would be not too bad, but if you go straight in a Super League, then you're probably taking a step too far too quickly. But at the same time, it's also that experience of, I had that opportunity of playing at the highest level against some of the best players. Obviously, England women are one of the best in the world at the moment. So obviously, Chelsea are stacked, Arsenal are stacked. So you want to try yourself against those kind of players, but also look back on your career and be like, how great was that when we played Arsenal in the cup, and I had to mark Hemp or someone like that. But it's a tough one. But I think as a player, I'd probably, in this situation where I don't want to count our eggs too much, but where we are quite comfortable in the league, so we could potentially push for a bit more of a cup run and get more games in, and just sort of try and go a bit further. But I'm not gonna be disappointed if this round you get drawn against Arsenal and playing against some of the best players in the world at the moment. So
I think as a known shirt collector yourself as well, Skibby, the thought of potentially being able to swap shirts at the end of the game with an England international would be quite tempting.
Absolutely,
too.
Yeah.
Fair question as well, or fair point from Jim here, and I don't think it's meant with any malice or any slight against the Fulham women's team, but as he says, the Fulham women, with the teams still remaining in the draw, quite unlikely to potentially progress. So maybe at that point, you do want a Super League team to be able to just say, this is our chance. Let's give it a crack against one of the biggest teams in the world and really soak up that experience. Look, it's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to finding out who we're drawn against, and I actually hope we pull one of the really big teams, and maybe the girls get a day out at the Etihad or Old Trafford, like I said, or Stamford Bridge, the Emirates, like one of those huge teams, and be able to, have a decent cohort of Fulham fans go along. So please do, if you support the Fulham men and we get a big game against one of the big Super League teams, please do get down to support the Fulham women's. The ties, I'll need to confirm when the ties are played, actually. I'll have a very quick look now.
But what would
The
be
ties we
fantastic, though,
played
wouldn't it?
on the
Sorry,
12th of January. So
No.
start the new year with a day out supporting Fulham Women's. Skibby, I think we can probably end it there. It's a lot to talk about. Like I said, we'll be back later in the week to talk about the Liverpool game coming up on the weekend. Anything else you want to cover off on before we finish up?
No, the last thing I was going to add was how great would it be that my Fulham ladies shirt becomes a, signed by an FA Cup winner. So go on, Mads, get that FA Cup.
Love that.
I can add that plaque. I talked to her about the plaque. I said that, we'll add the title winners and then we can add the FA Cup winners as well underneath it. It'll just keep growing, wouldn't it? And then player of the season, goal of the season.
Well, goal of the season's a lock already. I need to chat with Tia and see if I can get her to actually score one this season so I can put her stats up underneath her shirt. Skibby, thanks very much for joining today, mate. It's been good to talk about a really good result and a good run of results as well at the moment. Everything Fulham is very positive at the moment, and it makes these podcasts a lot easier than when it's not. A pleasure having a chat with you today, mate.
No, it's been fantastic, and long may it continue. I do love the recent performances, and I'm hopefully the festive fixtures to come to bite us where fatigue and fitness sets in. So let's see. Absolutely.
Big thank you, as always, to everyone who's joined in on the live stream. We've had a load of comments flying through today. We really appreciate it. Big thanks, as always, to everyone who subscribes to the podcast, follows us, everyone who is part of our Discord group as well. A huge thanks for all the support, as always. It's been a really great season so far, and really great growing those little communities. So we really appreciate it. Thank you again, everyone. Looking forward to talking about Liverpool later in the week. And as always, come on, you Whites.